There he is, Madik whispered. Keep still. There had been a movement up on the ridge of the mountain. For a moment something had appeared between the two rock outcrops. I didn't see any horns, Ben said. Keep quiet, Madik whispered fiercely. Ben crouched down behind a boulder and watched this man get into position on his stomach, his legs apart, the heavy rifle resting small, flat stone. Madak slowly lowered his face to the cheek piece and eased his hand down to the trigger. Now he lay motionless, looking through the long, fattened telescope sight. Ben had never known bighorn sheep to behave this way. There had been 5 of them on the ridge, but something had alarmed them, and they had disappeared. By now, they should be half a mile from here and still going. I'd wait until I saw some horns, Ben whispered. Without raising his cheek from the stalk, Madak said, I saw horns. I didn't. You weren't looking. I was looking, not through a 10-power scope. Ben stayed crouched, hanging his weight on the sling of his little .22 Hornet. The range was at least 300 yards, but this man, Madak, was dangerous with a gun. On the way into the desert, Madak had shot at anything that moved, and some things, like a Gila monster lying peacefully in the shade, that didn't move. And Madak did not miss. The gun was a beautifully made .358 Magnum Mauser action with a Winchester 70 stock with enough power to knock down an elephant or turn a sleeping Gila monster into a splatter. A bighorn hit with the gun would drop where he stood. Ben hoped that whatever it was up there would not show itself again. Madak huddled over the gun. There was an intensity in his eyes far beyond that of just hunting a sheep. It was the look of murder. There weren't any bighorn left in the world, and Ben couldn't understand why anyone would want to kill one, and yet for the past 3 days that was all Madak had thought about, killing a bighorn and having the head mounted to hang on the wall of his office in Los Angeles. Ben, my young friend, you're not the type of man who can understand big game hunting, Madak had told him the first night in the desert. Ben looked at Madak's face in the firelight, the skin seeming cold even in the warm, soft glow. The only hunting I understand is when it's the only way you can get something to eat, Ben had said. Since we don't need one for camp meat, shooting a bighorn doesn't sound like a big deal to me. That had really teed Madak off. You may not know it, but the chances of getting a permit to kill a bighorn are about 1 in a million. I've been waiting for years, hoping my name would be drawn from among the thousands of guys putting in for one. When you come out into this desert and risk your life stalking one of the smartest and wariest animals in the world, and you outsmart him and take him on his own ground, you've accomplished something. That's something you'll never understand. Madak had irritated Ben from the start, and he was sorry now that he had agreed to come out here with him, although he needed the money. Madak was going to pay him, it meant a semester in college, maybe 2. When can we go back to town tonight? Ben had told him. Or we can go back to town tonight, Ben had told him, and you can get a guide who thinks the way you do. A local yokel hotshot I don't need, Madak had said. All I want is someone to show me where the bighorn are. And they said in town you knew as much about their range as anybody. If this is a big competition between you and a sheep, Ben had said, wouldn't you feel a lot better doing it yourself? Look, my permit only gives me 7 days to kill a bighorn, and I could spend all 7 of them roaming around out here, not even finding one. You know where they range, and I'm paying you to take me there. From then on, it's just me and them, and I don't need some sand dune expert telling me what to do. Ben looked at Madak sprawled on the ground. For 3 days and 2 nights Ben had been in the desert with this man, and the only time he had ever laughed was after he told some story about how smart he was. Madak never lost a business deal, according to Madak, and in every deal somebody got hurt. It wasn't enough for Madak to outwit somebody, outdeal a man in some tricky way. The guy had to get really hurt, too. Listening to Madak made Ben glad he wasn't in the same world as this man. In Ben's town, on the edge of the desert, there wasn't anything for a man like Madak to wheel and deal for. And Ben thought, even after I'm a geologist and working for some big oil company, I still won't be in the same world as men like Madak. Ben looked down at his jeep on the flat desert, far below them. The heat around it made it seem as though it were underwater, the shape of it wavering in the distance. 4 more days of this man, but he was getting paid for every one of them. Ben relaxed and listened to the silence. The heat seemed to have killed every sound. It was as though he were in an enormous bowl of silence, as though from the Purple Mountains 60 miles east to the Brown Mountains 40 miles west, all sound had been silenced by the intense still heat. Even a plane from Edwards Air Force Base, the plane itself invisible, moved in silence, leaving 2 thin white lines across the hot blue sky. The sound of the gun was absolutely enormous. It was as though it had shattered the ground and cracked the blue vault of the sky and rolled the mountains back. The thing roared and echoed and lunged into the silence and seemed to roll on mile after mile, never to stop. And then, just as suddenly, there was the dead silence again. Madek's voice sounded small and flat after the great roar of the gun. He didn't even seem interested in what he was saying. Well, I got him. He was still lying prone as he worked the bolt. The brass emptied, flicking out and sailing end over end, then tinkling down among the stones at Ben's feet. He reached down and picked it up, tossing it from hand to hand, for it was still hot from the explosion in the desert. Madek rose slowly and pulled the rifle up by the sling. He took the lens cap out of his pocket and carefully fitted on the ends of the scope. Your uncle tells me you are working to get money to go to college, Madek said. That's right, Ben said, wondering why Madek suddenly wanted to chat. Madek dropped the clip out of the gun and slowly replaced the cartridge. You want to make a deal? He asked. Ben watched him shove the clip back in and hit it with the flat of his hand. Madek looked up. Well? What sort of deal? Money, Madek said. For school. You see, Ben, this is the only chance I'll ever get for a bighorn. They'll never put my name out of that hat again, not in a million years, so naturally, I want a good specimen. A ram with a really good rack I can be proud of. You said you saw horns. I did, but not for long enough to tell whether a tip had been broken off or they were all chipped from fighting. You never can tell until you really examine them, you know. What's the deal? It really doesn't even involve you, Madek told him. But I'm giving up a week of my time, going on a lot of expense to get a good specimen. That's all I want. So let's take a good look at what I killed, but if it isn't a good specimen, Madek stood looking at him, smiling now. Ben thought of the bighorn. He usually saw them when the sun was low and hard blue of the sky was fading into broad bands of soft colors and the mountains were turning purple. They would stand on the ridges, then probably looking a lot bigger than they really were just standing there against the blue sky, looking as though they owned the desert, the huge curved horns beautifully balanced. He had a feeling that what he and Madek got to the top of the ridge that sheep with a .358 Magnum through it was going to look small and forlorn and pitiful. A bloody thing lying among the hot stones, the bighorns twisted its neck somehow, some awkward position. If it's not a specimen you want, I don't report anything, and we just go on hunting for 4 more days. Is that it? Ben asked. It's not up to you to report anything. Anyway, is it? Madek asked. I'm the hunter here, right? Right, Ben said, but I don't want any part of you going around shooting every bighorn in the desert until you get a specimen you want. Madek laughed. Ben, now you know as well as I do, I probably won't even get another shot at one. So don't be a Boy Scout. If this isn't a good specimen, how about for double the money and a $100 bonus, we keep on hunting. If we don't find anything, we'll come back and pick this one. And you'll still get the extra money, okay? Ben remembered Madek's stories about the deals he made. Somebody always got cheated and hurt. But there were mountains where bighorn never went. Mountains looked exactly like these. Madek could spend the rest of his life looking for bighorn in those ranges and never find one. Okay, Ben said. After all, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, Ben. I'm just paying you some nice money to drive me around. There's nothing wrong with that. Not a thing, Ben said. Then it's a deal, Madek said, slinging the gun over his shoulder. Ben watched him start up the ridge, his feet on the stones making a lot of noise in the silence of the place. Ben knew now that whatever was lying there on the ridge wasn't going to be good enough for Maida. It could be the biggest ram in the mountains, but it wouldn't be good enough. Ben looked around, picking out landmarks so he could find this place again. As far as he was concerned, Medak has seen the last bighorn he was going to see, and whatever he had killed up there was going to be all he killed. Medak was well ahead of him as he started climbing, the heat blasting down on him as though it had real weight. Ben had reached a little area of shale, the flat rock sliding under his boots, when Medak got to the top and disappeared behind a boulder, so that only the muzzle of the 358 could be seen moving along. A patch of pale brown showed lying in a crack of the cliff of the face, and Ben looked down at where they had been. He had to admit that Medak had done a good job of shooting. He was not surprised to see Medak coming back in such a hurry that he almost fell. Ben waited for him, wondering what he was going to say about the sheep he'd killed, that the horns weren't big enough or were chipped. Okay, Ben thought, 4 more days of you, but you've seen your last bighorn. What do you know, Medak said, not even stopping as he went down the mountain. I missed him. I thought I had him cold, but I missed him. Ben looked at the man in disgust. He must have killed a ewe or a young ram with no rack at all, and now didn't want to admit it. You didn't miss him, Ben said. He's lying right there in the crack in the cliff. No, Medak said over his shoulder as he kept going down. I thought that was a sheep too, but it's only a rock I missed. I must have jarred the scope climbing up here, or this heat got to it, because ordinarily I don't miss a shot like that. Let's go see if we can find that herd again. At last Medak stopped and turned around. You've still got your deal if that's what you're worried about. That's not worrying me, Ben said. So let's go. If we can get around these mountains before sunset, we might see him again. Ben looked up at what he had thought was a dead sheep. What difference did it make to him that Medak was a liar? I'm not paying you to stand around, Medak snapped. I'm paying you to hunt bighorn. So move it. The thing that interests me, Ben said quietly, is that rocks don't bleed much. He pointed with his thumb at the pale stone of the cliff from the bottom of the V where the stone had cracked a trickle of blood, very dark red, and the hot sunlight ran down the heat, congealing it on the stone's face. Medak, his head down, walked slowly back up to where Ben was standing. Then he lifted his eyes and grinned. I'm a liar, Ben. I didn't miss that shot. Remember, you told me to look for horns? I said I'd seen them. I was lying then, too. I shot a little female. It's just I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid you'd call off the hunt. You understand that, don't you, Ben? Ben shrugged. Okay, I'll bury it. Why bother? Because the game warden will spot her from his chopper and know who killed her, is one reason. You want some more? You can't see her from the air. I had a hard time finding her. I was right on top of her before I saw her. You're not a game warden, Ben said, and kept climbing. Ben, Medak said. Ben kept moving. Ben! Ben glanced back at him. We'll lose the rest of the day, Medak said. I'd rather take my chances with the game warden than lose a whole day just burying a dead sheep. Come on, buddy, let's get going. The trouble with Medak is, Ben thought, he's always right. There really wasn't much point in lugging a dead weight down the mountainside to bury it in the sand. Here the vultures would be at it by dawn. By nightfall the coyotes would be here, and soon there would be nothing left but a few scattered bones which the rodents would in time destroy. And what difference does it make to me, Ben thought, if the game and fish department gets all over this guy? He looked up once more at the blood, now dried on the stone. He was closer to the broken stone of the cliff now, and his angle vision was different, so that he saw further into the fissure of the stone. A white-haired man was looking back at him. His eyes were faded, skim milk blue, and were wide open. His mouth was open too, and from it a trail of blood went down his cheek and out onto the rock.